My name is Marjorie DeWitt, and this is the story of how my 76th birthday turned into a trap, not for me, but for them. You might think birthdays at my age are all about cake, quiet dinners, maybe a few phone calls from distant grandchildren. You'd be right, usually. But not this year. This year, my family decided to make it special. Jason, my daughter's husband, called it a celebration of life. That's how he put it. The phrase felt like a eulogy, but I smiled and said thank you. I've learned that sometimes silence is louder than protest. Jason has always been clever. The kind of clever that hides behind charm and teeth too white for his own good. When he married my daughter Elise, he brought ambition with him more than love, I suspect. He always looked at my house not like a home, but like a prize he hadn't yet won. My home is old. Victorian brickwork, ivy trailing down the columns. The kind of place that looks like it has secrets in the walls. And maybe it does. More importantly, it has a safe built right into the floor beneath the study rug. Not one of those flimsy digital boxes. A proper steel vault with a triple lock and a handle that groans when you open it. Jason always seemed fascinated by it. I noticed the first time he visited years ago. He glanced at it, then caught himself and laughed, saying, "That's a real old-fashioned one, huh?" I said yes. What I didn't say was, I saw the way he measured it with his eyes, like he was sizing it for a break-in. I've run an antique shop for most of my life. People think it's all about porcelain teacups and dusty grandfather clocks. But it's about observation, patterns, human nature. You learn when someone's interested in the story behind the item and when they're just looking for a price tag to flip it. Jason. He always looked at things like they had price tags. That morning, I woke early. Something stirred in me before the alarm. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was habit. I walked downstairs barefoot on the old floorboards. The house creaked like it was whispering to me. I stood in the study doorway and stared at the rug that hid the safe. Then I turned on the light and walked to the window. A car was parked outside. Not Jason's. Not Elise's. Too early for guests. And yet, it idled. It pulled away when I opened the curtain. Later that day, Elise arrived early. Too early. "Surprise, Mom," she said, holding a bouquet of peonies. "We wanted to decorate before you came down." I played along. I smiled. I thanked her. Jason followed with 2 gift bags and a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. "Marjorie," he said with that oily grin, "today's all about you." All about me, I thought. That's what worries me. They strung up lights, balloons in gold and cream. I don't even like balloons, but I said nothing. The dining room smelled like frosting and synthetic candles. People I hadn't seen in years started arriving, neighbors, Elise's friends, even Jason's brother. I mingled. I smiled. But every now and then I glanced toward the study door. And each time it was unlocked. That door is never left unlocked. Not by me. Around noon I made an excuse and slipped away. My bedroom sits above the study. I took off my heels, crept to the vent, and slid open the hidden grate. Beneath me, I could hear Jason's voice, muffled but distinct. "I'm telling you, it's under that rug. She never moved it. It's all still there." There was a pause. Elise's voice next. "Just wait until everyone's distracted. We'll sneak in, grab it fast. She won't know. She won't know." I closed the grate gently and sat back on the bed, pressing my hand over my chest. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calm, ice cold. You see, what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I had already moved the safe. 2 weeks ago, it was no longer in the study. And the one under the rug, that was just the shell. A decoy. Empty. They also didn't know about the cameras. Tiny, black, silent, and tucked into corners no one ever notices, unless they're the type who clean baseboards with a toothbrush. Which none of them are. I had watched Elise unlock the study door 3 times over the past week. Once while pretending to dust. Once while Jason distracted me with wine. Once while they thought I was asleep. That morning, I had checked the recordings again. I knew what was coming. I just needed them to come for it. So I went downstairs. I laughed louder. I raised my glass when Jason toasted to family and legacy, and I waited for them to make their move. Because this wasn't just a party anymore. It was a test. And I had already passed. The party swirled around me like a staged play, every actor in position, every prop in place. Jason played the doting son-in-law, carving slices of cake and handing out champagne. Elise smiled so wide it almost hurt to look at. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, "You look beautiful today, Mom." Really? I wondered if she meant it, or if it was part of the script. The house hadn't been this full in years. Laughter, camera shutters, perfume. Someone's toddler was running around with frosting on his face. I nodded, smiled, thanked people for coming. But in my chest there was a drumbeat, steady and sure. Tick, tock. They'd make their move soon. Jason couldn't help himself. The man was the kind who counted money in his sleep. And I had just made it so easy. A house full of people. A cake to cut. A speech to make. A grandmother too distracted to notice the door creaking open. I knew he'd go for it while the room was distracted. But I didn't expect the precision. Around 2:30. Elise clinked her glass and said, "Let's have a toast before Mom cuts the cake." I stood at the front of the dining room next to the 3-tiered monstrosity they'd ordered. Jason handed me a knife wrapped in a silver ribbon. People raised phones and glasses. But when I glanced up just for a second, Jason wasn't in the crowd. Neither was Elise. My jaw tightened. Good. The cameras were rolling. In the corner of the room was an old wooden cabinet. To most people, it looked like a curio display filled with porcelain figurines. What they didn't know was that inside it, behind the middle panel, was a monitor linked to the camera feeds from the study. I excused myself. No one noticed. I slipped into the parlor, pulled open the panel, and flicked the screen to life. There they were, Jason and Elise in the study, crouched by the rug. Jason pulled it aside in a swift, practiced motion. Elise wiped sweat from her brow. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metal key, the one he must have stolen from my drawer last month, thinking I hadn't noticed. He fit it into the false lock on the decoy safe. It clicked open. He hesitated. Then he pulled it wide. His entire body shifted forward like he expected a cascade of bills, maybe velvet pouches or gold jewelry. But there was nothing. Just a single piece of folded paper. Elise stared at it. Jason looked like a child who'd unwrapped an empty box on Christmas morning. He snatched it up. "Read it." And that's when I saw it. The shift. His face crumpled, not in sadness, not in rage, in fear. He turned, glanced wildly around the room like someone watching shadows close in. Elise grabbed the note from his hand, scanned it, then let out a sharp sound between a laugh and a sob. They knew it was over. They hadn't just failed to rob me. They had walked into a trap of their own making. I turned off the screen and returned to the dining room, calm as a still lake. The cake hadn't been cut yet. The guests were still chatting. Someone was making a joke about turning 80. And then Elise walked in, pale as parchment. Jason followed, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Everything all right?" I asked sweetly, glancing toward the door. We thought we left the wine in your study," Elise said, voice cracking. I nodded. "Was it locked?" "No," Jason muttered. "Just forgot." "Well," I said, placing the knife gently beside the cake, "perhaps you'll remember what you found more than what you forgot." Their faces froze. Jason opened his mouth, then shut it. I raised my voice just enough to catch the room's attention. "I want to thank everyone for being here," I said, smiling. "This has been a very special birthday. One I'll never forget." Elise flinched. Jason swallowed hard. I cut the cake. They thought they had written the script. But the ending, that was mine to deliver. And I was just getting started. After the cake was served, the party began to dissolve into smaller conversations and slow goodbyes. Children grew restless. Parents gathered purses, someone turned down the music. But in the eye of it all, Jason and Elise lingered, hovering in doorways, speaking in rushed whispers, casting furtive glances toward the study, like ghosts trying to haunt a house that no longer feared them. I watched them from my armchair by the parlor window, tea in hand, calm. They hadn't spoken to me since the cake. Not really. A few strained words. But mostly they kept stealing looks like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it would just not yet. I had learned over the years that revenge is best served not just cold, but delayed. Let it settle in their bones like dread. Let them invent consequences more frightening than I could ever conjure. That's the real punishment, fear of the unknown truth. Around 5 o'clock, the last guests filtered out. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the floorboards. I stood at the door, waving to the neighbors, hugging the children. When I turned back, Jason was staring at me from the hallway. His face had the tightness of a man trying not to panic. Elise and I were hoping to stay the night. He said, "Too late to drive back, really." Of course. Too late to drive back, or too risky to leave without salvaging what was lost. I smiled. Of course, dear. Your old room is made up. It was in fact made up with freshly laundered sheets and a motion detector hidden behind the dresser. But he didn't need to know that. After dinner, tense and quiet, we each retreated to our spaces. I made a show of yawning and stretching, clutching my robe. "I'm off to bed," I announced. "Long day for an old woman." "Good night," Elise muttered, not looking up from her phone. "Sleep well," Jason said. But his eyes, they scanned me like a vault door still locked. I waited in my room, lights off. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. At exactly 11. 41p. I heard the hallway creak. Soft steps. Then the study door opened again. I watched the movement on the tablet beside my bed, linked to the hidden camera above the study's ceiling fan. Jason entered first, Elise behind him, flashlight in hand this time. They were searching now. Desperate. Like rats after a trap has already snapped shut. He pulled drawers, lifted rugs, opened cabinets. Elise checked behind paintings tapped on wall panels. But of course the safe wasn't there. It hadn't been there for weeks. I had moved it to a private security facility downtown, one I'd been paying for since 1998. It held my most important documents. Family heirlooms, my old marriage certificate, and yes, cash. Not millions, but more than enough to change lives. I watched them search for 37 minutes. Then I sent the message. A single text to Jason's phone. I saw it buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out, tapped it, and froze. Elise leaned over his shoulder. They read the message together. "You're not very good at hiding your footprints. Good thing I noticed the scuff on the drawer last month. Sleep tight." Jason dropped the phone like it burned his hand. Elise looked up at the camera, finally seeing it. Too late. They backed out of the room like children caught in the pantry. I went downstairs at sunrise. They were already packed. Jason wouldn't look me in the eye. Elise tried, bless her, but her face was a storm of guilt and confusion. "We've got to head out early," she said. "Work stuff." I replied. "No breakfast." Jason mumbled something and walked out the door. Elise lingered. "Mom, I don't know what Jason thought he was doing." I raised a hand gently. "We all make choices, Elise. What matters is how we live with them." She blinked, and then she was gone. When the car pulled away, I stood at the window for a long time. The silence felt heavier than usual, but also cleaner. In the kitchen, I poured myself a cup of tea. Then I opened the drawer beside the fridge and pulled out a small black notebook, my records of every strange incident from the past 3 months. Notes, dates, even serial numbers for the items missing from my shelves. It wasn't just about the safe anymore. It was about the erosion of trust. But I had my records, and they had my silence. For now. The morning after they left the house felt still strangely so, not quiet like peace, quiet like aftermath. I moved through each room slowly, like checking for wounds. The rug in the study was slightly off-center. A drawer in the library had been left ajar. A smudge on the glass of my grandmother's curio cabinet. All little signs, all confirming what I already knew. Jason hadn't just failed. He had been thorough about it. And Elise, whether she followed him blindly or walked alongside him willingly, the result was the same. They weren't just trying to take money. They were trying to take control. But I've lived too long. I've lost too many things on other people's terms. My husband, God rest his soul, died before we could ever argue about wills or deeds. I raised Elise on my own, worked double shifts to afford her piano lessons, sold off my own wedding pearls to keep her in university. And now I was the mark. I spent the morning restoring order, polishing surfaces, straightening corners, recentering the rug in the study, even though the safe beneath it was now just a hollow shell, a metal echo of what they thought they were stealing. By noon, I made my next call. "Harold," I said when my lawyer picked up, "it's time we talk about the trust. Has something happened?" I hesitated. Let's just say I've changed my mind about who deserves what. Harold had handled my affairs for years. A quiet man with a pen that moved like a scalpel. No questions. No judgment. Just action. By evening, he had drawn up a revised trust structure naming a charity I deeply respected as the new majority beneficiary. I had given Elise too much power in my documents. Durable power of attorney medical proxy. A relic of trust. All of it was revoked that day. Instead, I named Julia. Julia was my niece, my sister's daughter. She lived 3 states away and visited every summer without fail. Brought fresh flowers. Asked about the war medals I kept in the attic. Never once asked about the money. Harold faxed over the documents. I signed them that evening, then placed the originals in my new safe, the real one at the security facility downtown. The next day, I visited it in person. The vault was cold and humming with fluorescent lights. When the security guard opened my box, I looked inside to see everything still exactly as I'd left it. The emerald brooch, my husband's letters from Vietnam, the sealed envelope that read, "In case Elise forgets who her mother was." I added a new envelope to the collection, one labeled simply "After the Party." It contained a full transcript of the camera recordings from the night of my birthday, a notarized letter of events, and a copy of the new trust papers. A fireproof legacy. That night back home, I lit the fireplace and poured myself a glass of port. I sat in the armchair across from the study and let the flames do what they've always done, burn down what was unnecessary and leave warmth behind. Then my phone buzzed. "Jason." The message was short. "We need to talk. Please." "I'm sorry." I stared at the screen. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then again. "You don't understand. It wasn't what you think." Of course not, I thought. It never is. I typed back a single sentence. "You're right. It was worse." And I blocked the number. I don't need their confessions. I have the footage. I don't need their apologies. I have the power. What I needed was to never feel like prey again. People like Jason live off the assumption that older women are easy marks, that we're forgetful, that we're lonely, that we're lucky to have anyone pay us attention at all. But here's the truth. Age doesn't make you blind. It sharpens your hearing. And I heard everything they never said. That weekend, Julia called, just to check in. I saw the photos from the party, she said. "You looked radiant." I smiled. "Thank you, darling." It was unforgettable. She laughed. "You okay, Auntie?" "I will be," I said. "I'm just cleaning house." She didn't ask what I meant, but I think she understood. By the time Monday came, Elise sent an email. It was longer than Jason's texts. Confessional, carefully worded. She said she was ashamed, and that she didn't know what had come over them. That she hoped I could find it in my heart to forgive. Forgive, perhaps, but forget? Never. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a blank note card and wrote a single sentence. "You used my birthday to take from me. I used it to take you out of my will." I signed it, sealed it, and added it to the vault, just in case she ever forgot why the money never came. The following weeks passed quietly but not peacefully. I noticed the silence most in my garden, where once Elise would sit on the patio and complain about her life over tea. There was only the sound of birds. Jason's booming laugh had vanished from the hallway mirrors. The tension that used to sit behind my shoulders like a cold stone. Gone, but peace came with its own kind of ache. A part of me had still hoped they'd surprise me with something better than betrayal. That maybe the birthday celebration had been real, that Jason had changed. That Elise had remembered the woman who braided her hair every morning before school, who worked through the flu so she could buy her the violin she begged for. I'd held on to that hope like a fool clutches broken pearls still shiny but worthless. Then, in early March, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. The envelope was pale lavender, her handwriting unmistakable. Elise. I carried it to the kitchen, sat at the table, and stared at it for a long while. The kettle whistled, but I didn't move. When I finally opened it, the smell of her perfume drifted up, and I was hit by a dozen birthdays, long-gone finger paint and party hats, tiny shoes thumping on wood floors. I unfolded the paper. "Mom, I know I've lost the right to ask anything of you, but I needed to try. I'm sorry. I truly am. Jason. He pushed me, but I followed. I can't pretend I didn't. I thought we could outsmart you, that you wouldn't notice, that you were too old to see the truth. But the truth is you saw everything. You always did. And I never appreciated it. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, what I let happen. If you never speak to me again, I'll understand. Love, Elise. I read it twice. Then I set it down beside my teacup. Somewhere inside me something trembled. A small fracture of the mother in me, the part that still remembered holding her in the hospital room. Just an hour old, her face scrunched and red, her hand wrapping around my thumb like I was the only world she knew. But even that memory was not stronger than the truth. She had let her husband turn my birthday into a burglary. That wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's releasing the need for revenge. And I had already done that. I picked up the envelope, walked outside, and lit a match. The paper curled inwards like it too wanted to hide its shame. I dropped the ash into my flower bed where the first daffodils were beginning to rise. It felt fitting. Later that week, I received another call from Harold. Marjorie, he said, just wanted to inform you. Elise attempted to access the estate accounts. The bank denied her. Everything is locked under the revised trust. She'll try again, I said. She might, Harold replied. But there's nothing left to take. You've done it right. I thanked him and hung up. Then I called Julia. I need your help, I said. Of course, she replied immediately. What's going on? I want to host another gathering. She was quiet for a second. Another party. Yes, I said. But this time, no balloons. Just the people who stayed honest. She smiled through the line. I'll bring the tulips. That Saturday, I invited only 4 people. Julia, my neighbor Lorraine, my old business partner Edna, and the young delivery boy who always asked how I was doing instead of leaving packages on the stoop. I cooked myself lasagna, garlic knots, a lemon tart I hadn't made in years. It wasn't a spectacle. It was a celebration of survival, of clarity, of quiet power. As we sat around the table laughing, Julia leaned in and said, I don't know what happened on your birthday, but whatever it was, you look lighter now. I raised my glass. Sometimes I said it takes one betrayal to remember your own worth. Edna clinked her glass against mine. And sometimes, she added a safe, being empty is the best kind of full. I laughed. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't bitter. It was real. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, tucked between an electric bill and a coupon booklet. A thick ivory envelope, the kind used for weddings or baby showers. My name written in that careful curling calligraphy Elise had perfected in college. For a moment, my hands hesitated, still remembering the heat of the last envelope I had burned. But I opened it. Inside was a single card embossed with gold. Join us in celebrating the opening of Jason's new financial consultancy firm. Saturday, 5 p.m. Dress formal. Reception to follow. Family first always. I nearly laughed. Jason was opening a financial firm. After trying to rob me. The irony was so ripe it could rot. I read the invitation twice, then set it down. They weren't just pretending nothing had happened. They were rewriting the script. As if the birthday incident was a bad dream. As if trust could be reset with hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Family first always. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. They were trying to pull me back in, not with apologies, but with performance, reputation, appearances. And if I didn't show up, that would say something too, wouldn't it? But if I did show up, it could say even more. I pulled out my notebook, the one where I had documented everything, dates, behaviors, even the brand of gloves Jason wore when he opened the decoy safe. I flipped to the last page and wrote, attend, be kind, be calm. But do not forget, Saturday came. I dressed in navy silk and wore the brooch Jason once asked if he could get appraised for insurance purposes. I let my silver hair fall softly at my shoulders, spritzed the perfume my late husband always said made me smell like spring. When I entered the venue, heads turned not because I was loud, but because I wasn't supposed to be there. Jason's firm had rented out a small art gallery for the launch party. Abstract paintings lined the walls, White wine flowed freely, and Jason stood near the entrance like a politician shaking hands with people who called him visionary and ambitious. When he saw me, his smile faltered for just a second. Just long enough. Marjorie, he said, stepping forward. We didn't think you'd be able to make it. Oh, I replied, cool and pleasant. I wouldn't miss a night like this. A man rebuilding his life with borrowed bricks. That's art in itself. His eyes darted sideways, scanning for witnesses. Let's not do this here. Of course not. I said, my smile gentle. Let's not do anything. That's your specialty. I walked past him. Elise stood near the back wall sipping a glass of white wine, her dress as crisp and cold as her expression. She saw me and blinked hard as if she wasn't sure I was real. Mother, she said finally. Elise. I didn't think. No, I cut in softly, you didn't? Not then. She swallowed. I wrote you a letter. You did. I meant every word. I know. We stood there in silence. I really did think you wouldn't notice, she whispered. I turned to her then fully. Elise, I noticed everything. Every time you stayed silent. Every time you looked away. Every time you let him speak for you. She blinked. Her eyes filled just barely. I'm trying, she said. I'm not asking you to, I replied. Then I reached into my handbag and handed her a small white envelope. Inside was a copy of the letter I'd placed in the vault, dated, notarized, and sealed. This is for you, I said, so you'll never have to wonder why you were left out. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Jason approached moments later, red in the face. His voice lowered. You came here to humiliate us. No, I said, turning my gaze on him steady as the ocean. You did that all by yourself? I just came to remember who I am. And then I turned. I walked past the canvases and the laughter and the empty praise. Because I didn't belong to their version of the story anymore. They tried to rewrite me as weak. But I had rewritten myself as untouchable. And that's a truth no safe could ever contain. The days after the launch party settled into a strange rhythm. I thought perhaps that would be the end of it. That, after handing Elise the letter, after facing Jason under the artificial lights of his hollow empire, the story would go quiet. But stories don't end that easily, not when money's involved. On the following Wednesday, Harold, my lawyer, called me again. Marjorie, he said, sounding more annoyed than concerned. You'll want to hear this. I braced myself. Elise and Jason filed a petition to challenge the trust. They claim undue influence, mental decline, and emotional manipulation. In other words, they're calling me senile. I finished, my voice flat. I've seen this before, Harold said. They're not trying to win. They're trying to scare you into settlement. They think I'll bend, I said, standing at the window looking out at the overgrown garden. They think I'll panic. He hesitated. Should we respond immediately? I stared at the lawn. The sun touched the edge of the fountain Jason once said was a waste of water. I had built it in memory of my husband. Every summer it bubbled softly under the bird song. No, I said, let them sweat. Then we'll answer in court. And just like that, my birthday betrayal became a legal battle. But I wasn't afraid. I was angry. There's a difference. I pulled every document, every record, every digital file. I gave Harold the camera footage, the timestamps, the list of missing items. I compiled Elise's emails and Jason's old messages. I showed him a photo of the scratch on the drawer from the week Jason picked the lock. Marjorie, he said quietly, you've built a case stronger than most fraud investigations I've seen. I nodded. I don't forget what matters. In the weeks that followed, their lawyer tried to negotiate. If we walk away now, he said, during a mediation attempt, perhaps your client would consider reinstating partial trust funds. Perhaps she wants to avoid public embarrassment. I leaned forward across the polished table, looked him in the eye, and said, embarrassment. You think an old woman being robbed by her own daughter is embarrassing for me. Wait until the judge hears what was caught on camera. He said nothing more. The case was dismissed in 2 hearings. Lack of evidence. Lack of credibility. And as the judge said, an appalling attempt to exploit an elder for financial gain. I didn't smile as I walked out of the courtroom. I didn't need to. Jason and Elise didn't look at me. Not once. Not even when the judge asked if they had anything to say. I suppose they had run out of stories to tell. I returned home that afternoon and opened the back doors of the house. The spring air spilled in fresh and full of the scent of lilac. I took my tea to the garden and sat on the old stone bench beside the fountain. Julia arrived not long after. "You won," she said, smiling. "I didn't want to win," I replied. "I just didn't want to lose what was mine." She sat beside me. "That's not just a win, Auntie. That's a reclaiming." We sat in silence. Birdsong returned. I watched the water sparkle under the sunlight and thought about the safe. The empty one, still tucked beneath the study rug. It stayed there not as a vault but as a reminder. Sometimes emptiness is the best protection. Jason and Elise moved away within a month. Quietly. No goodbyes. No final calls. I heard through the grapevine they were renting now. Jason's firm dissolved after a few investor complaints. Elise had taken a job at a boutique 2 towns over. They were out of my house, out of my will, out of my peace. And yet, they were not out of my mind. Because betrayal doesn't disappear. It echoes. But so does dignity. And I had chosen which one would define me. Months passed. The headlines faded. The legal case became a closed folder in Harold's drawer. My house grew quieter. No cameras needed now. No locks double-checked before bed. Just the hum of a life that had finally shut the door on deception. One late summer morning, I received a postcard. No return address. Just a watercolor sketch of a coastal town. On the back, scribbled in thin slanted ink, "I think about what we did every day. I hope you're safe. I hope one day you'll talk to me again. E." No name? But I knew the hand. I didn't cry. I didn't burn it. I didn't file it with the legal records or tear it into pieces. I simply placed it in the drawer beside my bed next to the only other letter Elise had written, the one before the lawsuit. The one she claimed was an apology. I didn't believe it fully then. I still don't. Now. But I believe in time. And time had taught me that grief isn't only for the dead, it's for the living too. For the daughter I once knew. For the version of her that played piano in the hallway and begged for bedtime stories. That version was gone, and I had mourned her. I had buried that version of Elise beside the grave of my husband, beside my own illusions, beside my trust. And in its place, I had grown stronger. The safe was no longer hidden beneath the study rug. I had replaced it entirely, removed the old steel carcass and filled the hollow space with books, not to hide anything, but to remind myself, knowledge will always be safer than silence. The real safe stayed downtown, guarded by steel and concrete, untouched by betrayal. It now held more than just heirlooms. It held a different kind of legacy records, legal backups, handwritten notes of what had happened, not to protect myself but to leave a trail for someone else. A granddaughter, perhaps, or a curious niece. One day they'll ask why there are 2 birthday photos on the mantel, one where I smile surrounded by family, and one where I'm alone with a small lemon tart and a single candle. And I'll tell them, the first one was full of lies, the second one was full of truth. That fall I began teaching again, not in a classroom but at the community library, a course called Stories Worth Locking Away. Just 6 women all over 60. We sat in a circle once a week and told our stories, not just of betrayal, but of resilience. One of them, Linda, confessed that her son had borrowed her retirement to flip houses and never paid her back. Another, Joanne, whispered that her niece forged her name on a check. We nodded. We understood. And for once, our stories weren't met with pity. They were met with fire, because we had all been underestimated. We had all been told we were too old, too soft, too slow. But we weren't. We were just waiting. And when we moved, when we truly moved, we weren't storms. We were earthquakes. I started keeping a new notebook, not for betrayals, for victories. Every time I said no and meant it. Every time I chose peace over performance. Every time I remembered who I was without needing anyone else to affirm it. And in that notebook, on a page near the middle, I wrote one sentence in bold ink. They tried to take everything, but they reminded me I already had what mattered. Winter crept in quietly that year. The ivy on the columns browned and withered, the fountain froze in delicate sheets, and the wind carried with it a softness that made everything feel slower, deeper, more reflective. My house, once full of tension and footsteps and murmured betrayals, was now filled only with the sound of crackling firewood and the occasional kettle whistle. One afternoon, as I dusted the library, I came across a photograph I hadn't seen in years. It had slipped behind a row of books. A candid shot of Elise as a child sitting in the sunroom clutching a book to her chest, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen in decades wonder. The kind that only comes before life teaches you how to look at things like price tags instead of pages. I held it for a long time. I tried to remember what I had been reading when I took that photo. Something about fairy tales. She used to love them. Princesses, dragons, magical woods. She used to believe the world could be saved by cleverness, by kindness, by speaking truth in the face of cruelty. I suppose she forgot, or maybe she just stopped believing. I slipped the photo back into the notebook. Not the one with the betrayals, the other one, the victory ledger. Because that picture, despite everything, was still part of me. And so was she. But now she lived only in memory. In January, I received a package. No return label, but I recognized the wrapping immediately. Elise always had a flair for presentation. She used to insist on handmade paper and wax seals, even for birthday cards. This box was no exception. It was tied with a silver ribbon, the edges creased perfectly. I hesitated. Then I opened it. Inside was a book. A first edition copy of Wuthering Heights, my favorite. Taped to the cover was a note written in that same curling script. For all the stories we never finished, I hope this one still brings you peace. No signature. Just a heart drawn at the bottom like she used to do on lunch notes in middle school. I stared at it for a long time. Not angry. Not moved. Just still. She was reaching out. Not with demands. Not with apologies wrapped in manipulation. Just something I loved. Something she remembered. I placed the book on my nightstand. Not as a token of forgiveness, but as a placeholder. Maybe a door not fully closed. Because as much as I had rebuilt my world, stitched together a quieter, sturdier life, I could not deny the thread of her existence still ran through it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence speaks the clearest truth of all. That night, I opened the book and began to read. Line by line, word by word, the pages welcomed me back. Not to her, but to myself, to the version of me that loved stories, that knew not every chapter needed to end with closure. Some simply ended, and others, if they were written wisely, knew when to pause, when to hold the page, when to breathe, and when to begin again. Spring arrived earlier than usual. By March, the daffodils had broken through the soil, stubborn and bright, like they always knew they'd survive the cold. The fountain flowed again. The sun clung a little longer to the windowsills in the evening. I moved slower these days, not from weakness, but from intention. Everything I did was deliberate now. Every breath, every page turned every step into the garden. One morning, I received a voicemail from Julia. She wanted to visit, and of course, I welcomed it. When she arrived, her arms were full of tulips, her face soft with concern and, something else, respect perhaps. We had lunch on the patio overlooking the garden. She told me about her new promotion, her plans to travel, the man she was seeing. I listened, smiling, and asked the kinds of questions no one had asked me in years. Then she paused. "Have you heard from Elise again?" she asked gently. I sipped my tea. Only the book. And the card. Do you think she means it? I think I said, placing my cup down, that she regrets being caught. Julia tilted her head. That's not the same as being sorry. No, I said. But it's a start. We sat in silence for a while, letting the breeze wrap around us. Then I said, "You know, Julia, people think betrayal is a sudden thing, a stab in the back. But it's usually quieter than that. A series of choices, small ones, like turning your head, pretending not to see, laughing at the wrong time." Julia nodded slowly. "Elise didn't betray me when she opened the safe," I said. "She betrayed me when she stopped thinking I was worth telling the truth to." I expected Julia to agree. Instead, she surprised me. "Do you think she thought she had to lie?" she asked. "Because she knew you'd never forgive her if she didn't." I looked at her. Really looked. "You think I made her desperate?" Julia's expression softened. "I think sometimes people get so afraid of being cut off, they push the knife in first." It was a hard thing to hear. but not a wrong one. I spent the rest of that day in thought, walking the garden paths. At one point, I paused near the bench by the fountain, the place where I'd once declared my survival aloud. And I realized something. I had spent so much time fortifying the castle that I had become its prisoner. All my cameras, my locks, my vaults. They had kept others out, yes, but maybe they had also kept something else out too. Something like hope. That night, I unlocked the study for the first time in months. The hollow where the safe had been still echoed when I stepped on the floorboards. I sat in the armchair by the window and opened the envelope Elise had never dared to touch again, the one I had handed her at the launch party. I reread every word, and for the first time I didn't feel fire behind them. I felt grief. Not the kind that breaks you, the kind that clears you. I wrote a letter that night. Nothing long, no lectures, no forgiveness either, just truth. I don't know if we'll ever speak the same language again, but I am not closing the door forever. I am simply waiting for a knock worth answering. Mom. I sealed it, placed it in the mailbox. No guarantee she'd receive it, no promise she'd reply. But I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for me, because healing isn't about forgetting what someone did. It's about remembering who you are in spite of it. And I was not a victim. Not anymore. I was a woman who survived a betrayal wrapped in a birthday ribbon. And now I was deciding what kind of story would follow. 2 weeks passed. No reply, not a text, not a letter, not a knock. And yet I didn't feel ignored. I felt released. Because I hadn't written to change her. I had written to change myself. And sometimes that's the most radical act, choosing peace, when the world expects you to choose bitterness. I returned to my life. The library sessions grew more lively. Word had spread about our little circle, and now there was a wait list. Women from all over town, divorced, widowed, estranged, came in with stories folded like old laundry. Together we unfolded them, smoothed them out, sewed new meaning into the fabric. One woman, Denise, shared how her son stopped speaking to her after she refused to co-sign a second mortgage. Another, Clarice, confessed that her own daughter-in-law left her out of every family gathering after inheriting the house. Their voices quivered at first, but then they grew louder, stronger. We weren't victims. We were archivists of survival. One afternoon after class, Clarice stopped me at the door. I heard about what happened, she said gently. Your daughter. The party. The safe. I tilted my head. News travels. She nodded. But the part that got me wasn't what they tried to take. It's what you didn't let them change. I waited. You're still soft, she said, even after everything. I smiled, unsure whether it was a compliment or a warning. But either way, she was right. Because I hadn't let them harden me into stone. I still planted roses in the spring. I still baked bread for my neighbors. I still left the porch light on at night, not because someone was coming, but because light was meant to be shared. That weekend I hosted dinner again. This time it wasn't a replacement birthday party or a gathering of the loyal few. It was just dinner, good food, real people, no performance. Julia brought her new boyfriend. Edna wore a green velvet coat she claimed made her feel like royalty. The delivery boy, Simon, now a regular guest, brought a bottle of elderflower lemonade and told us he got into art school. We toasted not to survival, but to wholeness. To the things that remain, I said, glass raised. When everything else breaks away, the room filled with clinking glass and warm laughter. And as I looked around, I realized, this was the legacy, not the money, not the house, not even the safe. It was the ability to create a circle where no one had to hide, where truth wasn't a weapon but a bridge. Later that night, as I washed the last dish, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Hello. Silence. Then a breath. Then, it's me. Elise? I said nothing. I got your letter, she continued. I wasn't sure if I should call. I thought maybe the door was shut. I let that sit. Then I said I was waiting for a knock. Silence again. Can I come see you? Not now, not today, but maybe soon. I didn't answer right away, because forgiveness isn't a yes or no. It's a long walk on uneven ground. But I wasn't afraid of that walk anymore. So I said maybe, and in that word there was no promise, just possibility. It took her 3 weeks. 3 weeks from that call to arrive. No texts, no reminders, no forced effort. And then on a breezy Saturday morning, I heard a knock. Not timid, not demanding, just honest. I opened the door, and there she stood. Elise, older than I remembered. Or maybe it was just that I hadn't truly looked at her in years. The woman before me was no longer the little girl with scraped knees and music lessons. Nor was she the polished wife of a man who once smirked at the way I folded napkins. This was someone in between, someone undone. "Hi, Mom," she said, eyes flicking up to meet mine. I didn't say anything. I stepped aside. She entered the house like someone returning to a place they thought they might never see again. Her eyes moved from room to room as if tracing ghosts. The family photos still hung on the hallway wall. Her high school graduation picture, a black and white of her as a baby asleep in my arms. All still there. I hadn't removed them. I never did. She stopped at the edge of the study doorway. Her breath caught. The rug was gone. I had replaced it months ago with a woven cotton one from the market. Lighter, simpler, revealing the bare wood floor where the decoy safe once lay. "You moved it," she whispered. I nodded. "A long time ago." She turned to me. "Did you know? Back then, before the party." "I knew before Jason ever found the key," I said. She looked down at her feet. We stood in silence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. A soft gray one unadorned. "I brought something," she said. "I don't expect you to accept it. I wanted to leave something that wasn't a mistake." I took it, opened it. Inside was a necklace, my mother's locket. The one Elise used to ask to borrow when she was a teenager, the one I thought had gone missing a year ago. I'd assumed I lost it. Or that time had simply eaten it the way it eats so many things we think we've put in safe places. "You took this?" I asked quietly. Her face crumbled. "Jason said we could pawn it. That you wouldn't remember where you'd left it. That maybe you'd think it had fallen behind a dresser. And you believed him." "I believed what I wanted to be true," she whispered. The honesty in her voice was more painful than the theft. Because now I knew it wasn't hatred that had driven her. It was weakness. And that might have been worse. I closed the box gently and set it on the hallway table. We walked into the kitchen. I brewed tea, and for the first time in years we sat across from each other without pretense. She told me things I didn't know about her debt. Her fear, the way Jason always made her feel like survival meant winning, even if it meant stealing. She told me they'd separated, that the lawsuit broke more than their finances. It cracked open everything they pretended not to see. "He never thought I'd choose you over him," she said. But by the time I realized I'd already helped him break the lock. I stirred my tea. Then I said something I hadn't rehearsed. "I don't want you back in my will." She didn't flinch. "I know. But I do want you back in my life," I said. That's when she did cry. Not loudly. Not dramatically, just quietly, like someone exhaling a weight they'd carried too long. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. The skin was still familiar. So was the warmth. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't need trumpets or declarations. Sometimes it arrives with chamomile tea and the scent of spring lilacs wafting through a window. Sometimes it starts again not with forgiveness but with presence. We didn't talk about the future, not about birthdays. Not about money. Not about safe combinations or trust accounts or apologies wrapped in ribbon. We just sat. 2 women, 2 truths, 1 shared breath of peace. And for now, that was enough. After that day, Elise didn't return often, but when she did, it was different. She brought no expectations, no questions about the house or accounts or what might change in the future. She came with books, with homegrown herbs, with quiet gestures. Sometimes she stayed for tea. Other times, she just stood in the garden, hands tucked into her coat pockets, watching the wind carry petals from the magnolia tree like snowflakes. I didn't ask what she wanted anymore. I watched what she gave. One Sunday, she arrived with a small potted rosemary plant and a folded newspaper clipping. "I thought you'd like this," she said. The article was about a woman in another town, an elderly widow who sued her children after they tried to declare her incompetent and seize her estate. She won. The judge called it a case of calculated cruelty. Elise looked at me as I read it. Her eyes were careful. "I just wanted you to know," she said, "that I read things differently now." I nodded, folding the article neatly and sliding it into my notebook. Not the victory one. The new one. The one titled, "What Grows Again." The rosemary sat on the windowsill beside the kitchen sink. It thrived, much like this strange, slow-growing thing between us. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe something older, deeper recognition of what had been lost and what still remained. It was around that time I got another letter, this one from Jason. Typed, signed. Polite, no apology, just a request. "I understand if you never want to see me again, but I would like to repay what I took. Tell me where to begin. I owe you that at the very least." I read it once, then again. Then I placed it in a manila folder labeled "Closed Doors," because Jason didn't need my permission to grow, but I didn't need his presence to heal. He could do his work elsewhere. I had my own path now. At the library circle, we shared endings, not happy ones, not dramatic ones, just real ones. Clarice reconciled with her daughter after 5 years of silence. Denise moved into a home where no one asked her to fund a startup. And I stood in front of the group one afternoon and told them the story, the real one, about the birthday party, the safe, the cameras, the letter. The moment I handed my daughter the truth and said, "This is what you were cut from," they sat in silence. Then one woman raised her hand and said, "How did you stop being afraid they'd come back?" I smiled. "I didn't," I said. "I just stopped needing to control what they'd find." The room exhaled. Later that night, I opened the safe downtown, not because I feared anything, but because I wanted to place something new inside. A photograph, taken the week before, me and Elise in the garden standing under the lilac tree, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. No performance, no guilt, just two women weathered by truth, still learning what to do with forgiveness. I slid the photo into an envelope and labeled it "Proof of the Unlikely," because sometimes the most surprising thing isn't betrayal, it's return. Spring melted into early summer. The days stretched long and gold, the garden thick with life. My roses bloomed with more color than I remembered, their scent drifting through the open windows like an old memory. I had taken to writing again in the mornings, usually with a pot of tea, and the window cracked just enough to let in the birdsong. I didn't write for anyone else. No memoir, no legal affidavits, no therapy journals, just reflections. And one morning I wrote this sentence: "Some people leave when they steal from you. Others stay, and that's the harder theft." I stared at it a long while, because it wasn't about Jason anymore. It was about the years Elise had been near, yet never truly present. Smiling across dinner tables, sharing birthdays, asking about my garden, but always slightly tilted away, always a hand behind her back. And now she sat with me on the porch once a week. Sometimes she brought soup. Sometimes we said nothing at all. But she came, and in that coming was a kind of giving I never thought she'd be capable of again. One morning she asked if we could visit her childhood piano, the upright in the sunroom I hadn't opened in a decade. I paused, then nodded. The keys were slightly yellowed, a few sticking from disuse. Dust cloaked the lid like memory. Elise opened it slowly, reverently. "I used to think this was the only thing you loved more than control," she said, half joking. I didn't respond. She sat down and pressed a key. It rang, faint, out of tune. She laughed, quiet and embarrassed. "Guess time does more damage than silence." "No," I said. "Time just reveals what silence hides." She pressed another key, then another. A shaky version of Claire de Lune emerged, fractured and lovely. I closed my eyes. For a moment I saw the child she used to be. The one who played until her fingers cramped, who cried when I made her stop for dinner. She stopped mid-measure. "I didn't just take the locket," she said suddenly. I opened my eyes. "I took other things," she whispered. "A ring, a gold spoon. I gave them to Jason. He sold them before the party." I said nothing. Her voice broke. "I just kept hoping you wouldn't notice. That if I gave it back someday, it wouldn't count." I walked over to her and gently closed the piano lid. "You're returning something now," I said. "And that counts." She nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek, and I let her cry, not for guilt, but for the chance it gave us That afternoon, she helped me rearrange the living room, something Jason had always offered to do, but never actually done. We moved chairs, dusted shelves, even rolled up the new rug in the study to sweep beneath it. I hated this room, she admitted. Because of what we tried to do here. You didn't try, I said. You succeeded in hurting me. She flinched. But you failed to finish the job, I added. She looked at me startled. I'm still standing, I said, smiling softly. That's how I know I won. She reached for the broom. I'm trying to clean what I can. I touched her shoulder gently. Start with yourself. By evening, the house felt new again, not because the furniture had moved, but because the air inside it had changed. Lighter, not healed, not yet, but aired out. A place where stories could sit without shame. That night, I wrote a new sentence in my notebook. She returned the locket, but more than that, she returned herself. I placed it beside the earlier one, two truths side by side. And somewhere in between them, a story neither of us expected to survive. But we did, together. The last time we spoke of the safe was on a warm evening in July. The house was quiet. No guests, no calls, no past echoing through the halls like it used to. Just me, the ticking clock, and Elise standing in the study, her hand resting on the windowsill where the sun poured in. I still think about that night, she said softly. The party. What we were planning. How I convinced myself it was just access, not theft. It was both, I replied gently. She turned to face me, and this time there was no defense in her eyes. No excuses. Just the kind of worn-out honesty that comes from finally being done with lying to yourself. I thought if we got the money, she said we could finally stop living in fear. But the fear wasn't about money, was it? It was about you. About losing you. My breath caught. I was so afraid of disappointing you. She whispered that I did the one thing I knew you'd never forgive. And in that moment, I saw the little girl again, the one who once ran to me with scraped knees and tears that only dried in my arms. I walked to the center of the room, stood exactly where the safe used to be. This spot, I said, used to hold what I thought was irreplaceable. She looked down, nodding slowly. But you know what I've learned? I continued. It was just metal, cold and heavy. What really mattered was never in there. I placed my hand over my heart. It was here. And you nearly broke it. But you didn't. She took a step closer. Do you think we'll ever be okay again? I met her gaze. I think we already are. Just not the same kind of okay we used to be. A breeze moved through the room. Light filtered in golden. And for the first time in a long time, I saw not the woman who betrayed me, but the woman trying to rebuild the ruins she helped create. We stood together in that empty space. No safe, no secrets, no traps, just truth. Later that night, I wrote one last entry in my notebook. She didn't open the safe. She opened something harder herself. And I placed the notebook on the shelf beside the others. Not hidden, not locked. Just placed where someone could find it someday if they needed to know what resilience looked like in ink. People often think betrayal is the end of a story. That once someone crosses a line, the bond dies and nothing beautiful can grow in its place. But I've learned something different. Betrayal isn't the end. It's the fire. It burns down the illusions we've clung to, the lies we told ourselves to keep things comfortable. It scorches the story we thought we were writing. But if you let it, if you endure the flames, it reveals what's made of ash and what was forged from iron. I was forged from iron. I was underestimated by the people I raised, the people I fed, the people I opened my home to. They thought my softness was weakness, that my silence meant surrender, that my age made me an easy target. But they forgot something fundamental. I saw the small betrayals long before they dared touch the safe. I let them believe I was blind, so I could show them what true vision looks like when it's sharpened by wisdom. And in the end, I didn't just protect my possessions, I protected myself. If you're watching this and you've been betrayed, I want you to hear me. You are not powerless. You are not foolish. And you are not alone. You don't need revenge with fireworks. You just need to know where to put the lock. And sometimes, when you're ready, when they show you they're human again, you can open the door, just enough, not because they deserve it, but because you do. So go ahead, write it down. Say it out loud. Let your story be seen, because no matter how deep the wound, you're still here, and your truth is still yours to tell.